pleasure to introduce Ryan Condon from Satisfied. And you are in here because they're talking about boomers are retiring, so Gen Z and millennials are leaving. Do you have a strategy?
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody for coming today to our class. Thanks everybody for coming to the class. This is a topic that's sort of near and dear to us. At Satisfied, we do voice of employee programs to help you assess and understand your staff and your organization. And over the years, we've collected quite a bit of data to help us better understand how our boomers and Gen Xers and millennials and Gen Zs adapting to that equipment environment. How are they being treated? Are they sticking around? And so today, we're going to have the opportunity, I'll introduce John here in a moment, but we're going to have the opportunity to talk to someone that's kind of right on that millennial Gen Z line and get some firsthand experience about what it's like to work in a dealership, why they came to the dealership, and ultimately, what do you need to do to reshape your dealerships to fit this upcoming generation as all of your boomers and Gen Xers are retiring. So let's start off looking at a slide real quick. This is something that we put together based on the data that we're collecting. And when I first saw it, we first started doing this analysis, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is terrible. And very, very unsurprising based on the conversations that we've had in dealerships. And so you have the boomers and the Gen Xers that have the highest net promoter score. And for those of you that don't necessarily know what net promoter score, it's just simply like out of a scale of 0 to 10, how many 9s and 10s on a willingness to recommend your dealership as a place to work, and then how many 6s down to 0s, how many detractors, and then the percentage of promoters minus those detractors. And I always kind of share this as a concept. If you're at a barbecue and there's 100 people at the barbecue and 50 of them are talking about what a great place to work your organization is, and 20 people are talking about what a terrible place it is, your net promoter score is 30 NPS. So when we look at this, and we see this declining NPS by generation, it's telling me that we have a big problem. There is an issue that we don't have environments in the equipment industry that support these upcoming millennials and Gen Zs. So the goal here today is to really talk about why are we not getting the same level of satisfaction that we have with the boomers and the Gen Xers. I've heard some interesting thing in my debrief conversations after doing some of our report outs on the voice of employee. I've heard things like, we're waiting them out. Those Gen Zs and millennials, they just don't understand how to work, and we're going to wait them out, and eventually we're going to win, right? They're going to get it. They're going to work harder. I don't think that's a great strategy, but it is a strategy. All right, let's go to the next slide. So we're also, as we do this work, while it's not directly related to generation, we are looking at gender. And I know that in the workforce, in the equipment industry, with AED Women in Equipment and things like that, we're trying to get more women into the equipment industry. And you can see here that women actually are saying that they're a higher level of NPS, 21 versus 18, than men, which I think is great. It means that ideally, we're bringing women into the industry and they're feeling like it's a good place to work. Matter of fact, a little bit better than the men are feeling. So I think that's a really positive sign for the industry. And I think we need to focus on, well, why is that? What can we do to continue to support that and improve that and make it a destination place for women that aren't in the industry already? If we go to women by generation, this is also kind of interesting. So if you look at the baby boomers and the Gen Xers, females, they're actually underperforming the men from an NPS perspective. And I'm not super surprised about that, because to me, these females have been in the industry for a relatively long time in a situation that historically has been a more male-dominant environment. And so it's just, maybe it wasn't built or as conducive for that environment. And then we get down into the millennials and the Gen Zs, and we see females actually outperforming on NPS. Which I think it's great. What we're saying here is, hey, we're starting to create an environment that's more friendly for millennial and Gen Z females. And so I think that's great. Now you see that big spike on Gen Zs and female, and I think that some of that may have to do with the fact that we have maybe more females coming into the corporate environment, and those corporate environments tend to be a little bit more friendly than, say, the parts counter or the service counter or service bay or things like that. So we have more information and can dig into that, but that's kind of what that blip is there at the bottom. And I think that's, do you want me to talk about this. So each year we do a employee and customer benchmark report. I think it comes out March, Emily. So we'll go ahead and take all of the data that we've collected over the last 12 months, and we'll roll it into this benchmark that talks about dealer performance as it relates to customers, as employee, gender impacts, generational impacts, things like that. So this is a pretty awesome report. We do a pretty good job of communicating out from a marketing perspective when it becomes available. So you can scan the QR code and I think go to last year's report. So did I do everything okay there? Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let's get started. So we're really fortunate to have John Fiddler. John is 31, correct? 37. That millennial Gen Z. John has been with Vermeer Texas, Louisiana since 2012 and has grown his career entirely within dealership, starting on the front lines. What's awesome is he began as a service tech, spending more than 3 years working hands-on with Vermeer's industrial equipment. From there, moved to the parts specialist role, gaining exposure on another side of the business before stepping into a specialized position as horizontal directional drilling tooling specialist.
That's correct.
I had to work on that one. Over 6 years in the horizontal directional drilling space, John built deep industry expertise and strong relationships with contractors across Texas. He serves as an outside sales rep, selling the full line of Vermeer industrial equipment and helping customers find the right solution. John's path from service to sales gives him a unique firsthand perspective on career growth, communication, and what it takes to build a long-term future inside a dealership. So thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I'm really excited about this. Someone that has gone from service to parts to sales, has run the gamut, is a younger generation, can talk to us a little bit about what that looks like and what some of the challenges are. I think it's fantastic, so we really appreciate it. Before we jump in and start drilling John with very difficult questions that are going to make him uncomfortable and challenged and sweat, I do want this to be a collaborative discussion. So if anybody has questions, I'll typically stop and pause a little bit as we move from one question to the next. Please feel free to raise your hand and contribute. I find that the more interactive that these sessions are, the more value that everybody gets. And our biggest goal is to have everyone in this room walk away with one thing that they can take back to their organizations and say, wow, we can do this, or we can change this, or we're having a similar challenge in our environment. Maybe I'll reach out to John or Ryan and have a conversation with them about how they solved it or what they know about other dealers that are doing it. So please, once again, feel free to raise your hand as we get through this. Okay, let's start with kind of what attracted you in that early experience. So why the heavy equipment industry?
Well, for me, it was an opportunity to get in the industry where there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of angles you could go to. Wasn't necessarily focused on Vermeer per se, but just getting in the industry. You know, growing up as a kid, what young boy doesn't like seeing big trucks and construction equipment? It's exciting. All through school, you know, I was really good at math and science, and probably could have been a mechanical engineer or some kind of engineer, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't want to spend 4 years and get in a lot of debt to come out on the other end and still not know what I want to do.
Yep.
I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So I thought that getting into like working on construction equipment would just be a skill set I could always fall back on no matter what the economy was doing, because there's always some type of construction going on.
So when you started as a service tech, how do you think that, like, did your generational upbringing, your drive, your commitment, like, did that impact your ability to do what you thought was a quality job? Or kind of tell me a little bit about how you think some of that generational impact might have been.
Like influences as I was growing up?
Yeah, well, I think like when you go, like a lot of people, maybe when they look at like a service tech role or something like that, like was that your aspirations? Is that where you wanted to go? Like, why were you driven towards that? You know, what was it about that? And then when you actually had that service tech experience, what about it did you enjoy?
Well, growing up, I always liked to tinker with things.
Okay.
I could take it apart, couldn't necessarily put it back together, but I liked working with my hands. And like I said, I just felt like that was a stable career path. Again, not knowing what I wanted to do in life.
Yeah.
I just thought at least if I could get a skill set that I could always use, you know, I'd always have something there.
Awesome. When you were recruited, what year were you recruited? What year did you start?
2012.
Okay. When you looked around at the other people that were getting recruited about the same time, going into similar roles, because you were probably working with them on a regular basis, were they similar or different than you?
I guess similar.
Okay. Well, I just mean like, I hear a lot of stuff during our Voice of Employee survey processes about, work ethic or commitment or drive or things like that. And I hear retention issues, right? Where people are struggling to retain, service techs and things like that. So when you came on board and you were, like looking around at the other people that were kind of in a similar time period being recruited in the organization, were they similar to you? Were they driven? Did you feel like there was this group of people that were more like you or more dissimilar to you?
I would say around the time that I was hired on, there was a lot of similarly aged people that were pretty driven and motivated just like I was.
Okay.
I had some acquaintances from high school or even the technical school I had gone to that weren't as motivated and driven, and they just didn't seem to have any kind of want or need to actually work.
How many of those people do you think that were recruited back there when you were still with the organization?
Oh, the majority of them.
Okay. And do you think that has something to do with the recruiting process? Because I'm not sure is that normal, you think, out there?
I don't know, across the industry or other dealerships
Yep.
or, branded equipment, but it seems like for the most part, most of the people that were hired on around the same time, they're still with us.
Okay.
In some form or fashion.
And so one of the things I like to always do is try to give people information that they can take back. What do you think was unique about that hiring process? So it sounds like that was a really positive thing. What do you think was unique about that allowed them to find, sort of to identify those type of prospective employees that would stick around? And once again, thinking about like, what can we share with this group that they can take back to their organizations and go, hey, I can learn something here.
Yeah. Maybe it was just the fact that those people, like I said, they're all driven, they're all motivated. Maybe they did or didn't have aspirations. When I first got hired on, I didn't know what I wanted to do. It was just my foot in the door. But I was very intentional in the interview process of asking about career growth and opportunities to move around in the company, different departments.
And do you remember what they were intentional at doing during that interview process? Was there anything that stuck out to you as far as the activities or the questions or the approach or the number of interviews? Or
Main thing for me was like the branch manager at the time. After we kind of got through the informal interview process, he actually walked me around the dealership, introduced me to different departments and different levels of people within each department, and just the culture seemed like a family.
Okay, very cool. What made you feel confident that you had made a decision to be at the right decision to be in that organization?
Just the fact that they would ask questions kind of about what your aspirations are or where do you see yourself, and even if you didn't have an answer then, like our director of operations at the time asked me, it was about a year and a half into my employment, he said, where do you want to be in 5 years? I said, I don't know, but I want to be here. I said, maybe not necessarily in service, but I want to be with this company. And shortly after that, I don't know, 6 months, maybe 8 months down the road, I got back in touch with him. I was like, I think I want to be in sales. And it's not like it was a quick transition. It took probably 10 years from that point, or 7 years from that point to get into sales. But just knowing my aspirations of what I wanted to do, it led into other opportunities to continue to grow with the company. And that's what was important for me.
Great. All right. Does anybody have any questions about that? Anything they want to share that they think is unique and different in their organizations that helps identify the right people during the recruiting process or retention process? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think if you wouldn't have intentionally asked you that question, if you would have been thinking about it and then gone to someone and said, hey, my goal now is sales? Like, do you think that him starting that conversation with you was like a tipping point in feeling like you had access to someone that you could talk to about it?
Before that, I had never even put any thought into the possibility of like what path I could take. At the time it was called a communication committee, and it was kind of a networking thing where we'd get in touch with other people and other dealership locations. They were all Vermeer, Texas, but just other branches and, people from service up to management, everywhere in between, and just networking with those people, talking about, where did you start? Where do you want to end up? What are your goals and things like that? It was never really a thought in my mind at the time. But then when he asked me that, it kind of put a spark or an idea in my mind. Okay, maybe I can be more, or maybe I want to be more. So yeah, I think that was extremely important in my growth process.
Anybody else? Any questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Going back to that same conversation, the organization, you said you're attracted to the culture and you really want to be part of that business, even though you didn't know exactly where your placement would be. Did their HR team have any sort, whether it be a real regimented or kind of some soft-handed annual review where they would talk with you about that stuff? Maybe not necessarily score you, but is that where that question came out? Hey, where do you see yourself next year, 5 years? Were those regular conversations, or was it something that was kind of avoided? Because in our industry, we see companies that avoid the review like a plague. There's still companies out there that swear by it. It's where they really build their people up. So what was your organization like?
So, we've evolved over the years too. Back then, yeah, we did have annual reviews. That wasn't necessarily part of that review process, or at least not with me. It was more just kind of a performance review. This is how you're doing. This is where we want you to be, or this is what you can do to get to the next level of your position. But I think now that is more of a informal or formal question where whoever's giving those reviews, whatever level leadership, they're asking those questions. They're more intentional about what do you want out of life and out of your career with us.
Yeah, go ahead.
Fellow millennial here. I work for the manufacturer side, and so I work with a lot of different dealers across North America. One of the biggest, issues they run into is hiring technicians, and then sustainability of keeping those technicians on. Right? Is there a way or a path you could have saw yourself in moving up through the chain on the service side versus going into sales?
Yeah, absolutely. There was opportunities where I could have gotten in a field truck or, moved into the service management side. I just knew that's not really, once I had the aspirations of moving on from service, I felt like if I'd gone into one of those other roles, I wouldn't necessarily be stuck, but I felt like it would have hindered my ability to move on.
I think to that point, it's interesting when John and I were doing some prep for this session. He's like, hey, I haven't really, done something like this before, but I want to sort of, kind of try something new and push my boundaries a little bit, right? And I think that potentially a true service tech who's going to stay in the service tech area for their entire lifetime probably isn't as interested in getting up on stage and having a conversation like this, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think we they're definitely out there, right? There's no question. But I think that we kind of need to figure out how to help and coach these people in a direction that supports, where they're kind of, what's their superpower, where they're going to be great at. And you don't know it when you come in. And I've been in some interviews lately in our own company at Satisfied, where I've started having some early conversations with recent graduates where I'm like, where do you want to go, right? Because I'm going to help you. And ideally it's here and we find a place for you in our organization. But if it's not, that's okay. Let's figure out what your path looks like, and then let's let you have the most success. And if it's not here, that's okay. And I think that's a really weird conversation for these people, because they're like, well, we just got it started here, and you're telling me that I may not be here. And I'm saying, no, actually what I'm telling you is I want to help you on your journey. I want to help you figure out where you want to go, what you want to do. And I will do my best to find a place for you here. But if it's not here, I also want to do my best to help you along on your way. So
I think it also depends on the person, seeing why they're motivated to want to be in a certain position. If you wanted to be a service manager, okay, are you just after a title or a certain pay, or do you truly want to manage a team and help them grow and evolve?
Great. All right, let's move on here. Let's talk about what a good day looks like. And I sort of like I've joked a little bit about like a boomer good day is, coming in at 7 and leaving at 8 p.m., right? And a millennial and a Gen Z good day is coming in at 10 and leaving at 2. And I say all that kind of tongue in cheek and laughing, right? What does a good day look like for you? And if you could kind of talk a little bit about how that differs across the organization and ideally how it differs across generations.
Okay. Well, every day is different for me. I'm outside sales, so I work out in the field. I'm usually on job sites or meetings with customers. I do spend a lot of time at the branches, not necessarily because I want to. It's just a necessity of getting some paperwork done. But I mean, I start every day with a purpose and intention. Before I go to bed the night before, I already kind of have it mapped out in my head how the day should go, but I leave enough room in there to be flexible or pivot when something comes up, because in any kind of, heavy equipment industry, things come up every day. And if you're too rigid and stick to your schedule, then you're not available for your customers, or it just throws off your whole day.
Okay, so let's look at, I think we can go back to service or parts or even sales, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you look at other people in the organization, do you feel like they're doing that exact same process as you are?
It depends. I mean, like, let's say...
Because, does anybody else in this room do that? Don't you just wake up in the morning and be like, hey, it's a new day. What am I going to do today?
Well, that's the thing. Like, I'm always excited to wake up and say, okay, what does today have for me? But if you're, like, when you work in parts, you go to the same store every day, clock in around the same time every day, clock out. It's pretty monotonous. Feels like it's very repetitive. You're doing the same thing. So I can see, or at least for me, it's easy to get burned out in that environment.
Yep.
Some people thrive in those environments. They like the structure. They like same thing all day, every day. It just depends on the person.
Yep. So what type of, like, when we think generational differences, can you overlay generational differences at all in those roles? Like, how do you see other salespeople that are younger than you or older than you? And I think for this discussion, ideally millennials or Gen Zs, how do you see them doing similar things to you as far executing on similar jobs with the different approaches? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Well, no, what I think I want to try to do is there, and the answer may be, Ryan, there's no difference, right? But are you seeing differences in approaches out there with different generations in the dealership? So your approach, starting the night before and working through that stuff, I think is great, right? Are you seeing other people that are not doing that type of stuff or have different approaches? Some people that just kind of wing it a little bit?
Yeah, it's all over the board. I think for the most part, especially like in an outside sales rep role, like you are in charge of your own schedule. No one's telling you where to go, what to do, who to see. Like, if you want to make money, you better be rolling.
Yep.
It seems like, we've got some really tenured guys that have been around for 20 and 30 years, and they're very consistent. A lot of times they'll like to show up at the branch, 6:30, start talking to everybody, just ease into their morning, where I like to just get after it, start going straight to job sites. If I scheduled customer meetings, the day before for that day, get there at 7 or 7:30. You also got to be conscious of their schedule, because usually between about 7 and 8, they're trying to roll all their crews out of the yard. So you don't want to be in the way.
So then would you say that you're a little bit so is that group that's coming in early and socializing and stuff like that, does that tend to be an older group?
Not necessarily. It's just
it's across the board.
Yeah.
Okay.
Each person's different.
What do you go ahead.
I'm less social.
Okay.
I'm more mechanically minded or structured. Like, I just want to get to work. Other people like the social atmosphere.
Yep. Okay. What do you find frustrating in kind of the work world, like for you, like when you look at like how you go about the job, what's frustrating to you?
I would say when there's communication breakdowns, lack of communication, that's one of the most frustrating things, either, internally within a dealer or just interactions with customers.
Okay. So question out to the group here in the audience. What are you guys, has anybody seen anything unique or different across the generations as it relates to how they do their jobs? Yep, right in the back.
I've been in the business for 35 years. I feel like I've seen 3 different phases. Early on in the first phase, it was financial. We were offering really good jobs to people right out of college. And then it went into a phase where career was important and advancement in that career. Right now, it feels like I talk about my son's a Gen Z. Where do you want to live and what's the lifestyle that you want? To your point earlier, Ryan, about let me help you. It's not so much about the job and the career path, but what's the lifestyle you want? There's no such thing as work-life balance. There's work-life management is the reality of it. But it's where do you want to live and how do you want to live that life? And I find that there's not the patience for the training and development that they want to jump right in and they want to go. What would be 3 things that between the two of you would see that as a modern day recruiter, that as we're talking or recruiting these generations, what are 3 things that we really should be focusing on as we talk to them or as we recruit to them?
That's a question to us.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm asking a question back.
I love it.
I watched the last session of Landman last night, and it said question with a question. So let's stick it with it.
I saw that too. Yeah.
Are you asking me a question to my question? Do you have an answer to that?
So, what are 3 things as far as like what motivates people, or can you rephrase the question?
I think as somebody who, this is the age group that I'm hiring now for a lot of different roles in the dealership. What do I need to be talking to them about to make them want to come into our business, be an equipment dealer, work in sales or parts or service type of thing from your perspective, and Ryan, from what you're hearing in your group? I'd like to walk away with, man, here's 3 things I really need to be focusing on as I recruit these people.
Love it. I have one. Do you have anything you want to?
I mean, you can go first.
I think that they're really interested in a career path. Not necessarily that they're going to stay and navigate that path with the organization, but I do think a critical thing is understanding, like, how do I grow in this organization? I think the days of like, hey, you're really fortunate that we've hired you. You're really fortunate to get a paycheck, and we just need you to come here, and eventually over time we'll let you know what we're going to do with you each year, and be thankful. I think those days are gone. So I think that the more that you can talk about the concept of a way to support them in their own personal goals in the organization is really critical to hear. Whether or not they really want that, whether or not they're going to stay with you for a long enough period of time, they want to believe that this isn't a dead-end job, and after 1 year they're going to be doing the exact same thing. And I think you kind of mentioned that, right? You're like, hey, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And they asked me, like, hey, what is your future plan? And so I think maybe this generation is wising up a little bit and saying, hey, John didn't know to ask that question when he was being recruited. But the younger generation's like, listen, I've watched my dad or my dad's, whatever. I've watched these people, and they kind of got stuck in something and they were unhappy, and they're constantly looking for something else. And so I think for me, talking about the fact that a path and an opportunity exists is a critical one. Anything else to add to that?
Well, it's funny, as I was kind of getting prepared for this panel discussion, I went around and asked several people within our dealership group, whether it's parts or service, whatever. Most of the service guys, their main reason for wanting to be, a service tech or a mechanic is, well, my dad did it or my grandpa did it. It's just what we do. It's, and they didn't really have any thought beyond that. It's just, kind of a generational thing. Everybody else did it, so that's what I'm going to do. I think the career path thing is extremely important. I don't necessarily know that people nowadays, younger generations, are chasing titles. It's just more they want a sense of purpose. They want to feel valued and respected. And when companies, invest time and resources into their employees, that's what makes them feel valued.
Well, and your comment on purpose is really interesting. We have a question on our Voice of Employee survey that talks about whether or not the employee feels like their input is valued in the organization. And that tends to be a low performing score on a regular basis. And I find that fascinating, right? Because this younger generation wants to have impact, wants to be important, wants to be able to understand where things are going and how they can contribute to it. And it's relatively inexpensive to let people provide their input on where things are headed and be well informed about the decisions that leadership making is another one of our questions, right? So feel like my input is heard and listened to and feels like I'm well informed about the decisions that are being made in my organization. Well, if I'm coming into this organization as a young person thinking about my future path, nobody's telling us where we're going and nobody's letting my input have any impact on the business, I'm going to move on. Right? This isn't a place that values me. It doesn't value my opinion. And that traditional approach of, hey, listen, you're lucky to have a job here. Just sit back and work hard, and we'll figure out how to make sure you're taken care of. Isn't. I mean, they've seen that that's a fallacy and it doesn't exist. And there's terminations and reductions in force and things like that. So, I think getting them involved in sharing feedback as far as what they think is important, sharing, getting some lines of communication to leadership so that they can share their input. You don't have to do anything with it, but you can simply listen to it and make someone feel like they're heard. I think a lot of us have those same situations in our own homes, right? If somebody can make sure that they're feeling heard at home, that they're also happier and feel like they're a part of a partnership that's working well, right? So, any feedback from the audience as far as things that are critical you think during that interview process to make sure you're talking about?
Not exactly regarding the recruiting process, but a question for you then is, sounds like career pathway is really important, feeling valued is important, and making a difference is important. How did your company maybe support you in possibly with tuition reimbursement for your vocational schooling, and or how did they develop you to go from a service tech to a parts person to a service person? Is there any kind of investment in you they made to develop you to make you ready for those advancements?
So as far as tuition reimbursement, I went to a technical school long before coming to Vermeer, so that was just all on my own. We do have programs where we partner with trade schools. Like there's one in Oklahoma, I think it's called Okmulgee, where it's almost like an internship where they go to school for a month or two and then they come and work for a month or two, and that's been great. And they do help with tuition reimbursement there. As far as my growth with the company and investing in me that way, just continuing to talk with me and let me know when opportunities were coming up. They wouldn't necessarily come to me and say, hey, this position is opening up, it's yours if you want it. No, they would just say, hey, we're thinking about adding this position on. If you're interested, you might look into it. And here's why. If this is where you want to go in the company, you have an opportunity to learn another side of the business. Like I didn't have any aspirations to work in parts, but it was part of my journey and my path. And like everything I did was a stepping stone to get into sales. And it made me well-rounded, gave me a good foundation, and built a ton of rapport with the customers before I ever even got out in the field. So it was very instrumental in my success. And I think it's interesting too, as branch managers are walking people around that are interviewing to be a service tech, especially young kids or interviewing for the internship program. When they introduce me, they say, oh yeah, this is John Fiddler. He's been with us for 13 years. He started in service. He worked in parts. He did all these other things within our organization, and their eyes kind of light up. Like I said, I was getting prepared for this panel discussion. I was talking to some of these young kids. I'm still a young pig, but anyways. And a lot of these kids that have been hired on the last 6 months or so, they don't really know who John Fiddler is. When I told them, yeah, I've been here for 13 years, and I started in the same position you're in, like their eyes just light up because they're like, oh, wow, I didn't know that was a thing. So going back to a question earlier about how instrumental was that conversation, it was huge for me as far as them asking me where I wanted to go or, what aspirations I had.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so on that note, outside of the three things you hate about Vermeer, Texas, Louisiana, I'm just kidding. Kevin Nuckley, which equipment your competitor?
I thought that was a familiar face.
John, I'm sure we crossed paths, and I've heard your name a ton of times, and it's because of your work experience and what you've done, in our area, no question. But it makes me think about wondering even if you think you're a unicorn, in a sense of like coming out of the service department, because I think, even as Ryan attributed, like we kind of put a stigma on the techs, and that's, kind of where they're going to be. And if anything,
they're going to have any rise, it may be more on the part side because there's that whole product support element, you know? And so, yeah, I mean, and we've had a couple even texts say, I think I want to get in sales, and we kind of look at them, you know, and I can tell you historically, we looked at them sideways and been like, yeah, you know, I don't know, because it seems like, you know, sometimes, you know, that like those techs and the parts guys are a little different. You even mentioned like, you know, that whole, you know, the salesy guy that's ultra social and, you know, kind of stuff like that, right? But, and I do believe in work ethic, good character, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And so I was curious, again, going back to the first question, do you believe you're a unicorn, or do you think there actually is, you know, maybe some latent potential, in you know, whether it be in service and parts techs in our industry?
Both. You know, again, going
I mean,
back.
this is definitely a unicorn right here.
Well, no, like going back to that preparation for this discussion, talking to other millennials and Gen Zs, just in general about, you know, what do you think about the generation? They all said the same thing. They're lazy, they're entitled, they don't want to do anything, you know, all this stuff. I'm like, okay, well, what about you? They're like, well, I'm different. You know, I'm motivated, I'm driven. I'm like, okay, well, you're about the 10th person that said that. So then you're not a unicorn. So no, I'm not a unicorn. As far as potential in service techs, I think there's a lot of potential in service techs, even in a lot of the ones that I work with on a day-to-day basis. You know, they might see a certain life or think that, you know, the sales position is a magical position, it's the best thing ever. I mean, it takes a journey to get there. Like, I had no sales experience, no communication skills. Like, the only thing I knew how to do was work with my hands. And if I had jumped straight into a sales role, I probably would have failed. But taking the path that the company allowed me to go on, and I don't know it was necessarily intentional, you know, which position I was in whenever. It was just opportunities. But everything helped me grow. I have seen people in our organizations leave being a service tech or a field tech and jump into sales, and within 6 months they're back into service because they couldn't handle it. Whether it was the pressures or they just didn't like, you know, cold calling on people. There's just different aspects of it. But I think there's a lot of potential there with service techs, and they want more. They just don't know how to get there. They don't know what that path is.
So a couple things popped into my head as you were talking. One of them was the fact that I was working with a dealership recently, and they have something called deep dives, and they require staff to go out to a customer and do what they call a deep dive with the customer. And it's not necessarily if there was a specific problem or things like that, but it's effectively an opportunity to force that employee or a couple employees to get out there and learn more about the customer. And then they have to report back on that deep dive about what they did. And some of those deep dives, it's my understanding, include service techs. And so the reason I think that that's relevant here is because I think that gives you that initial opportunity to see how a service tech could perform in a customer-facing opportunity like that to learn more. And as I was talking to this group, I asked some questions, and one of the people that was a manager had been a service tech. I said, what was the scariest thing about those deep dives when you went out there? And he said, he's like, that they were going to ask me something that I didn't know the answer to. You know, and I said, do you think that would make you kind of feel dumb in front of the customer? And they said, absolutely, which is classic service tech, right? I know all the stuff. I have deep, detailed understanding of things. And I said, do you think it's reasonable that you're going to know everything in front of the customer? And he said, absolutely not. I said, do you think it's reasonable to say, hey, I don't have that answer, but I will go find the answer and I will get back to you? And I think those sort of activities are awesome for starting to build that muscle of that service tech to start to engage with customers. So I think about those activities that you can do that are not a direct transition over to sales, but are customer facing and are engaging and are outside of the service bay, that maybe give them an opportunity to prove to you whether or not they have what it takes without a difficult situation. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is, and I have no idea if this is a good idea or not, but when you talked about those younger generations or those younger kids coming on board and their eyes lighting up watching your journey, it seems like if you have someone like a John Fiddler in your organization, that's a great opportunity to realize that they value that. And so with intention, maybe find those people and have that, you know, someone like John on a regular basis or new recruits or whatever, sit down and talk about their journey and share about how they've had a great experience at Vermeer, Texas, and why that's been different and impactful and valuable. And now you're starting to build that culture of, hey, we have people, they've been where you are, they've gone through those experiences, and you could do the same thing. So I think that's another powerful takeaway, finding people like you in the organization.
Yeah, it's just giving them inspiration or showing them that there is something beyond just the role you're in right now.
Yeah.
And I think most companies that notice potential in someone, they'll ask the right questions or put them in the right path to do something different.
Okay, I have 16 more questions and we only have 15 minutes.
That's fine.
So,
Rapid fire.
I'm just kidding. Communication. So when you think about how you personally receive feedback in the organization or how you see others, like talk to me a little bit about, in your mind, the best ways to give feedback to the younger generation.
I mean, one of the first things is just frequent feedback. Talking to all the younger people in our company that I did over the last few weeks, that's the main thing they said is, getting feedback once a year at your annual review, that's great. But if there was opportunity to improve myself along the way, that would have been nice to know. And we just assume, okay, if there's no feedback, we must be doing something right, or they would have told us.
So what do you think the frequency should be?
I think that's individualized too.
Yeah.
I don't really
weekly, monthly, quarterly. It's clearly, you don't think it's annually for this younger generation.
Yeah. I'm in a lot more meetings now as a sales rep.
Yep.
And so there is a lot more feedback going around in different discussions. But, on a service tech level, well, we've got incentive programs now, different tiers of training and different things. But talking to some of the other people, they're just like, yeah, I didn't know if I was doing a good job or a bad job. I was just wait for my annual review and that was it.
Great. Okay, feedback from the audience here. Who has something cool that they're doing in relationship to feedback with staff, especially the younger generation? Anything? Anything they're proud of? Anything that they think works? Anything they want to share? Anything that you're doing that doesn't work aside from the annual review?
Along with the annual review, we've implemented now, we do the full annual review and then we're doing more of a performance-based review. But we've also implemented different pulse surveys that we send out to the staff that might have, say, 5 key questions that might have been something that came back in an employee opinion survey. And then, okay, so communication, for example, possibly could be an area that we know we need to focus on. So then we would implement a pulse survey just based on communication alone to get some deeper dives into what they mean by that. And the more of those pulse surveys that we've done, the more participation we've seen come back from the staff. And I think that that's because that they're starting to see that, okay, we're hearing them, we're listening to them. And then we do a town hall follow-up from those pulse surveys to say, here's the results of the survey, and these are some of the key takeaways that we're going to be looking into.
And what is your name?
Michelle.
Michelle, thank you. Michelle does not work for Satisfied, but I think that that's probably the smartest answer that we've had from anybody in today's session. No, I love it. I think that's great feedback. We're obviously huge advocates of doing employee surveys and pulse surveys and things like that. I think the one thing you added, which I love, is the town hall concept. I don't know if that gets done as much, right? Like we share the results from the employees' feedback surveys, and I think there's a lot of amazing information that gets out that can be taken from those surveys. I'm just not always sure how much gets shared with the organization. And one of our recommendations, if you do anything like this, is as you collect this data, share with the organization what you heard. It's so critical for employees when they share that feedback in your organization about what's going well and what's not going well, that they also feel like you heard them and you can go back and kind of summarize the activities that either need to change or you're going to work towards or things like that. So I think it's incredible and I agree with you. Awesome. Anybody else? Yes. Yeah, shoot.
So, I told you what I do. One of the things that I think we miss, especially with the up and coming generations, is it's whether we do sporadic feedback or ongoing feedback, it's not given in a way that they are comprehending it. It's not specific enough. it doesn't give them something actionable to do or not to do. And I think that's part of it, especially when we're talking about, how some of us screw up, that are in the older generations. We're kind of used to it and, we know how to interpret that. But I think these generations need it to be much more specific and actionable and really paint the picture of what it is, because even if you're giving it, you're still missing the boat.
That's great. Thank you. Anybody else do anything neat as far as feedback or communication?
We encourage stay interviews, whereas like exit interviews, you're asking them, why did you leave? Or what went wrong? If you can find out, what do you like about your job? What do you not like? What can we do better in this specific area? What could you see changing in your role that you could participate in? So it keeps them engaged, keeps them happy, lets them know that you're listening.
Thank you. Awesome. Okay, 2 areas that I want to jump into. The retention. So this is a hot topic. Any thoughts, and we can open it up as well. Any thoughts as far as how to retain these younger generations?
I think a lot of it goes back to, putting pay aside because everybody wants more money, is the person feeling valued and respected. And each person might get value in a different way. But I know like something that would huge and it's profound the first time you get to do it is like, getting to go to the factory. I didn't realize how many people in our organization have not had that opportunity to go to the factory. But when you get sent to the factory for training or any kind of event, like you really feel like the company is investing in you and they see something in you to where they're allowing you to do that. Or any kind of off-campus training, I would say.
That's great. One of the things that I heard too is helping people understand that their contribution is more than just a service invoice or a parts invoice, right? Helping associate the activities of that service tech to actually what the end goal is, keeping a producer up or keeping a construction provider up. So helping connect the dots between how their actions in the organization actually drive value outside of the organization, I think can be really powerful. And I think actually letting them go out, maybe do some on-site visits, whether it's that deep dive concept or what, the more that you can get people in your organization to understand that their job is more impactful than just kind of that invoice that goes out the door, I think can be really critical. Anything else on retention for you?
No, but just touch on what you just said. I didn't realize until I got out in the field as the HDD tooling specialist, the impact that every department within a dealership makes on the customer.
Yeah.
And we all need to be one team because we're serving that customer. Without the customers, we have no business. And yeah, it's the why behind what we're doing. You're not just fixing a machine. You're getting this, mom and pop customer that's his only machine, that's his livelihood, back up and running.
Yeah. Well, and I'll add, we have a new Gen Z employee, and we have in our booth, we have the ability to go in there and input your dealership name, and it'll show you the competitors nearby, and it'll give you a printout of how you compare to your competitors, and some other cool performance things. And he developed a lot of that based on some of our spec, right? And so I sent a picture of it, of the kiosk that you could interact with and what he designed on it and things like that. And he messaged me back and he's like, that's incredible. He's like, to see something that I built that you're going to display for people to interact with is so awesome. He's like, it's such a great feeling. And I think all of us can give our team members that type of feeling by letting them kind of see, touch, and feel what they're actually doing outside of their little world. Okay, I think this is probably our last question, and then we can open it up, our last topic. Let's reimagine the dealership. And this was sort of a Ryan Condon out-of-the-box thought, and it may or may not hunt. But think about, like, we see the NPS scores when we were looking at that. We have the boomers and the Gen X's. They're like, I love this place. I love this job. It's amazing. And we have the millennials and the Gen Zs who are like, not as engaged, not sure I want to stick around. We have retention challenges and stuff like that. If you're in charge of reimagining the dealership, are there some things that you would suggest need to change to be able to be more accommodating for a younger generation?
I'd say probably a lot of it just comes to technology and digital formats of things integrated, operating systems or processes where it's easier to accomplish things. If you have to go into 6 different platforms to accomplish one task, that's a problem. And it slows everything down.
Yeah, and I've heard that in some of our survey stuff, and I've heard some of our, like the younger generation are accustomed to doing things easily and without a lot of clicks and intelligently. And a lot of the systems and processes that exist in the equipment world are still, not all of them, but some of them are still kind of antiquated. And could be a lot better to keep up with kind of, Instagram and TikTok and some of the ease of execution in some of those platforms. Anything?
Well, I mean, as soon as you start changing that, then all the boomers and Gen X's, they're going to complain about everything being too technologically advanced. So there's a happy medium there. You can ease everybody into it.
There is. And I think you're right. I think if we are sort of reimagining the dealership and we are trying to figure out how to make it more friendly for the younger generations, I don't think it's an overnight thing. Matter of fact, when I see scores like this with a dealership that we're working with, I typically say this: listen, I think you have a millennial or Gen Z problem. My recommendation to you is to put together a community of practice that's populated with people from each one of those generations separately, and then have them work together and come to leadership with some ideas about how they improve the dealership based on some changes that need to accommodate these newer generations, right? And I said, this is not a 3-month or a 6-month thing. It may not even be a 12 or a 24-month. Maybe it's 36, right? But I think getting these younger generations to talk together about what they can do to meaningfully drive change in the organization, and then giving them that avenue to leadership to present those findings and results accomplishes some goals, right? My input's heard and my opinions matter. This is a place that I want to be for a long term because they're listening to me and they want to change based on what I'm telling them. So I think there's a lot of benefits to that type of stuff. Now, I will tell you that if you absolutely are not going to do anything with the results of that, then don't do it because you're going to make people more angry. But if you are open to driving some change, think about this concept of a generational community practice group that can come to leadership and talk about how things need to change.
Yeah, I think you hit on an important note there. Don't ask the questions and get feedback and do nothing with it or even acknowledge that they gave feedback. Because that's the quickest way for people to quit giving feedback. They lose a lot of trust and interest in sharing their thoughts.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, anybody for reimagining the dealership? Any thoughts or suggestions? Yes, talk to me.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for being here. I really appreciate the conversation. One thing I would want to touch on, which is something you mentioned, was with technological advancement. I think a lot of people in my generation, if you're getting into an industry like this, a very traditional industry, you're driven to that because of passion. A lot of busy work that we are doing today, if it is eliminated using new technology that's coming in, might be one of the largest catalysts to actually bringing a lot of new talent into a lot of different companies. And I mean, that's my opinion. That's what I've heard from my colleagues. But yes, that's all. I just wanted to share that.
So let me ask you a question. How would you change it? How would you impact it?
Well, I mean, of course, softwares are expensive. A lot of companies are still being led by people who are, legacy titans in industries, and they do not want to change simply because they've succeeded in the last 30 years because of the way they're working. And rightfully so, they believe that they know what's right. But with times changing, especially in this generation where artificial intelligence is, your long-term vision is no more even 5 years. 5 years is too long. You don't know what's happening in the next year. So, keeping that in the back of your head and being innovative and being open to spending a little bit more of cash into seeing, okay, would this help me, satisfy my employees where they can actually do what they have come here to do. As a salesperson, you enjoy speaking to people, you enjoy servicing, and, seeing that smile on your customer's face, that is what you enjoy, not going back to your branch and doing the busy work and typing shit on your computer. Sorry for the language, but that's what I mean.
That's great. Thank you.
That's exactly right. Repetitive tasks or things that should be a lot easier to get done, it takes away from you doing meaningful work or building relationships with customers.
Well, and to that point, like I use generative AI obsessively in my job, right? And when I get done with a meeting, its ability to be able to let me ask questions like, hey, can you draft an email to this person explaining what we just talked about? Can you draft an email to this customer, doing this? Can you do this? And boom, within 5 minutes, 2 minutes, I have something that would have historically taken me a couple hours to probably have something professional and polished, right? So the more that we can implement stuff like that in the equipment industry, I think to your point, I think we have a better chance of attracting younger talent. Anybody else on reimagining the dealership? Perfect. 4:14. We're going to stop 1 minute early. Please give me a round of applause for John Fiddler for joining us today. Thank you. And for all the great questions. If you have any questions at all for us, we'll be here a little bit afterwards, and then we'll also be out in our booth with Satisfied. You can stop by and ask questions. I love to talk about this stuff, as you've seen, so happy to chat.